car pulled up into the clear gravel space that sat beside the dirt road. It was 4 o'clock and the sun was already positioning for its final descent into the stalks of the seemingly endless cornfields around them. Kevin noted that the other parked cars were empty and guessed that the others were already hiking down the trail which led along the twisted limbs of the woods that ran along the borders of the field. He looked at Stephanie as she applied maintenance touches to her makeup in the rearview mirror and once more asked himself silently if this was actually anything close to a good idea. Stephanie was a stubborn, willful girl, and arguing with her once she had decided upon a certain course of action was akin to trying to move a mountain with a golf cart. She looked at him and smiled with her white, surgically sharpened teeth and black lipstick, with what was supposed was her attempt at innocent sweetness. However, between the vampire fangs, heavy layers of corpse-white foundation, and dark red eyeliner, the effect was more intimidatingly sinister than cute. "Cheer up, Grumpy," she laughed mockingly. "This is supposed to be fun." She opened the door of the Escalade and got out, adjusting the black leather miniskirt she wore over the dark purple stockings covering her short white legs. Without her makeup and gothic-style clothing, she would just be a short, plump outlet store manager with washed-out blonde hair and small, squinty hazel eyes. But tonight, like on all weekends, she was downright sinister. She was taking her large leather handbag from the back seat as he stepped out of the SUV, stretching from the long drive. 3 hours, Steph, he said, shaking his finger with disgust. For a haunted house, when there are like 5 in Chase alone. For God's sake. This is not just a haunted house, Kevin. I told you that. She was already walking towards the path as the cool October breeze played at the black-streaked strands of hair which hung over her face. Oh yeah, like I could forget that we came here to have sex with ghosts, he added as he checked the internet page on the cell phone, which displayed the map they were to follow into the wilds of the Indiana countryside. It had been September when Stephanie had stumbled across the website called Spectrophilia, and this entire nightmare had begun. Stephanie was obsessed with the supernatural, and it had only been their 3rd date when she had started discussing her fetish for ghosts. It had been in those delicate first stages of their relationship, and he had expressed false interest and mild amusement in her endless dialogue about the joys of physical contact with the deceased. According to her, she had been having regular intercourse with spirits since she was 14, and since he himself had a peculiar fascination with feet, which she obliged, he had found himself forced to tolerate her interest. That had been until this new development, when she had become intrigued with a Halloween party hosted in an abandoned factory in Indiana, where the main draw was its proclivity to the occupation of sexual contact with spirits. The website had explained that the old Kosgex factory had been a producer of copper wire in the late 1990s, before a series of equipment malfunctions had eventually forced the owners into bankruptcy. Urban myth maintained that the plant had originally been built on the family cemetery of a local farmer, whose house still stood only a half-mile away. The family, being gone long extinct in the region, could lodge no protest as the tombstones of their ancestors were bulldozed and bodies left torn and mixed in the soil on which the foundations of Kosgex was poured. However, it was known that the spirits of these disgruntled souls were solely responsible for the utter failure of the plant after only 5 years of service. A local resident named Samantha Fargrass, with a sizable inheritance and a fascination with the occult, had purchased the property and invited several local ghost hunting groups to explore the abandoned business. These groups had proclaimed that the building was host to dozens of entities and that a physical encounter with them was imminent upon arrival. Now, every year in the month of October, an event was held during which any explorer with enough money and who passed the background check could enter and have the sexual experience of a lifetime. But seriously, is all this worth $3,000? He said, thinking of the vacation to Florida he had sacrificed in the face of Stephanie's will. Oh my God, Kevin, you are such a drag. Seriously, it's like I'm talking to my dad or something. She rolled her eyes within the novelty corpse contact lenses she had purchased just for the occasion. Did I complain when you spent $600 on those Italian pumps you just had to see my feet in? He cast his gaze at her booted feet and thought with a smile that she really did have the sexiest feet he had ever seen. They walked along the path, shuffling through waves of red and brown leaves, which danced and tumbled over the packed earth. Stephanie was going through her bag and checking her mental list of items required for the night's event. She had brought flashlights and candles, since the factory had no electricity, condoms for contact with the living, and several bottles of tequila, which they were already sipping from as they caught their first glimpse of the Mitchell house. The old two-story farmhouse stood some 10 yards from the side of the trail, just as described on the website. Trees grew all around the house as dried vines clung desperate and dying to the falling boards of the walls. Windows with ancient shuttered glass gave view to the decrepit emptiness within as tall bleached grass swayed in the breeze. Stephanie took her digital video camera from her bag and stood filming in the place with excitement of a child seeing the gates of Disneyland. "It's just like on the website," she chimed with glee as she zoomed in on the rotted, dilapidated porch. "There are houses like that everywhere. It's the Midwest, for crying out loud. Kevin, I'm only going to tell you this once. If you ruin this for me, then not only will I leave you, but I will take the dogs." He thought of his two boxers, Ralphie and Primrose, with sadness as he imagined awakening one morning to find them gone forever. "I won't ruin it for you," he groaned with resignation. The sun was setting as they crossed onto the cracked and moss-laden concrete of what used to be a company parking lot. Kevin noticed that there were still a few rusted shipping containers sitting along the dock doors of the massive building. He had not imagined that the place would in fact be so huge. It loomed like a medieval castle, sprawled out over the sea of the dried harvest-ready corn as they approached the glass doors of a small office section. He sighed with anxiety as he saw that there was a group of people, most dressed in a similar style as them, gathered by the entrance. He saw several wave at them as they progressed towards the waiting throng. Just one big, happy, ghost-humping family, he thought sullenly as Stephanie hugged a tall, black-haired girl who was dressed more punk than goth. He recognized her as one of Stephanie's many social network friends and smiled politely as the girl's boyfriend blew smoke from his nose and shook his head. "Glad to see you made it," the man Kevin knew as Jake Gore said, with the same haze of enthusiasm he had witnessed in Stephanie. "Yeah, I practically had to cut off his balls to get him to come here, but we made it." Stephanie laughed as she playfully punched Kevin's arm. "What, Kevin still has his balls?" Miley, the punk girl, said, winking. "She lets me take him out on the weekend," Kevin responded as he took another sip of tequila and decided to relax. The group's attention was suddenly drawn to a dark figure, which is approaching on the other side of the thick blast of the door. Kevin heard several snaps as it was unlocked and a largely built older woman in a long black dress stepped out among them. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Samantha Fargus, but you can call me Sam." Her face was round and tan beneath the straight, white-streaked brown hair which hung over her shoulders and breasts like a fine sheet of spider's web. "Welcome to Spectrophilia. Please present me with your IDs and I will escort you in." They formed a line and filed past her one by one as she inspected their driver's licenses and social security cards. The three giggling girls in front of them were stopped as Samantha raised her hand, and two younger muscle-bound men in security shirts appeared from within the doors. "Charles, Larry, please escort these girls to the path, please." The girls did their best to protest as Samantha pocketed their fake IDs and they were taken by the two men across the parking lot. "You should all know that this event is only for adults, and I do have a security staff present should anyone choose to violate the rules posted on the website. Alcohol is allowed, but no illegal substances are permitted. You will be allowed to freely explore the buildings as you please, but be warned that this is an old facility and there are many hazards you would do best to avoid. After you enter, you must sign the agreement forms I have left on the tables in the cafeteria, and you will be required to present them to the staff before entering the event areas." Samantha studied their IDs and smiled professionally as she okayed them to enter. They followed the line down a long white brick hallway where a bouncer stood pointing for them to turn right at the end. The office building had restored power and was lit with fluorescent overhead lights as they entered a small break room where their contracts were laid out neatly on the tables. Kevin glanced at the forms and saw that they were agreeing to forsake any legal discourse concerning any harm that might befall them during the evening. Stephanie signed without a thought, as did he, after a moment of hesitation. They left the cafeteria and walked the length of the hallway, past doors to offices and a solitary ancient water fountain. He saw that there were open restrooms from which emanated the strong smell of bleach as they came to the entrance to the factory work area. The first chamber was a gigantic cathedral of a room lined on the far wall with a row of large glass windows which gave view to the cornfield outside. The floor was marked with large squares where massive pieces of machinery had once sat beneath gigantic ventilation modules, which still hung from the ceiling some 25 feet above, along with long metal rafters and tall rusted support beams. On the farther walls were railed stairs that led up to the service platforms and the second-floor offices. Overall, the impression given was one of abandoned emptiness, like the ruins of some ancient city. Kevin imagined workers filing in every day to man gigantic rumbling machines which produced long lengths of coated copper wire. For those of you seeking privacy, I recommend that you find your way to the outbuildings or far corners of the shipping areas. Otherwise, any space is fair game for play. Samantha waved her arms like a game show hostess presenting first prize. The main group immediately began to split off into subgroups as Stephanie and Miley joined hands laughing as they led them off into the shadows of a long corridor. The walls were dented tin painted a dingy green as they switched on flashlights and began exploring. They passed an open utility room which housed what Kevin guessed was some sort of main source for the building's now defunct heating and cooling system. He saw a dust-covered, wide-drawer filed cabinet and, overcome with curiosity, entered through the cobwebs and stale heavy air. Opening the top drawer, he found it was home to the original blueprint building plans for the entire facility. Lifting the dry, thin paper, he saw that beneath was a collection of newspaper clippings associated with the plant's opening and eventual closing. Going through them eagerly, his interest was piqued by an article concerning the two disasters which had led to the factory's closing. The first had been an explosion of a piece of equipment used in the forging of the wire that had left 20 workers scalded and injured with another dead. The other had been in the receiving department when two trucks had slammed into the dock doors at full speed simultaneously before exploding. OSHA inspections had declared the place unsafe to work under current conditions, and so the factory's short career had ended. "Kevin, come on!" he heard Stephanie shouting from the outside of the room. He carefully returned the papers to their previous position and left as he brushed dust from the chest of his long trench coat. Miley and Jake were wandering off to the back of another large chamber, where Kevin could see that outside darkness had fallen through another row of long glass windows. Stephanie was leading them into what appeared to be some sort of long storage area that for all purposes was a dark shed with a large roll-up dock door that led to an outbuilding. Finding the door half raised, they stepped out into the cold night air and walked to the doors of the large tin structure, where they found the white metal door unlocked. Inside was utter darkness and heavy damp air tainted with the faint odor of mold as they shone their lights around the emptiness. Kevin could see that Stephanie's hands were shaking with excitement as she removed a blanket from her bag and flapped it out over the cold, damp concrete. She withdrew and lit 9 candles in a circle around them before placing her video camera in his hands. Hastily taking a swig from their shared bottle, she began to remove her clothes before laying down flat and completely naked in the blanket. He stared at her with wonder and a certain amount of fear as she began to speak. "Spirits of those who wander this place, I am willing and waiting for your touch." Kevin chuckled softly to himself as he thought she appeared to be waiting for more than a touch. He wondered how long it would be before he had a chance to play ghost with Stephanie. It was then that he was overcome by a startling and sharp cold which dropped upon them like a rush of bitter wind. Stephanie's eyes flashed open as she looked up at him and asked, "Are you filming?" He nodded that he was, even though he had just then hit the record button. He watched through the small screen of the camera as Stephanie's skin suddenly grew taut and covered in goose flesh as she arched her back slightly from the floor. "Oh my God, they're here," she whispered, with breathless excitement, as her hands folded over her stomach with speechless arousal. Her legs spread as her hips rose to whatever presence she felt between them. Kevin's hands were now shaking, but from general terror, as he began to hear voices whispering in the darkness around them, where he knew no one to be present. Stephanie was writhing with pleasure as strange wisps of gray smoke seemed to swirl over her breasts and throat. She was smiling and biting at her lower lip, as he could almost see indentations appear on her soft skin, where something was pressing with unseen hands. "Oh my God, Kevin, there are so many," she sighed, as her breathing became erratic and excited with each passing moment. Watching through the camera, he was startled to see vague, recognizable hands and faces brushing against his girlfriend's thighs and stomach. He began to wonder when this would end, as the ends of his fingers were growing numb from the cold, and now to his horror he could feel frozen, subtle caresses on his neck. As the sensations increased, he began to lose control of his terror, and the urge to fling the camera to the floor and flee into the night became a desperate, screaming need in his chest. It was at the apex of this hysteria that he saw Stephanie's eyes were open and shining with what he realized was no longer excitement, but fear of her own. "Kevin, it hurts. Make them stop," she said as her body tightened, and she began to struggle against an oppressive weight which seemed to be holding her pinned to the floor. Her hands were squeezed into tight fists as her legs were pushed farther and farther apart. Her face was contorted beyond discomfort now, as every move to free her was countered by a thrust of cold, horrible force, which once more would leave her pinned. As she fought, Kevin threw down the camera and moved to grab her, but found he was enwrapped in an impenetrable cocoon of icy, charged energy. Stephanie screamed as 4 long claw marks began to appear at the top of her breast and stretched slowly down across her ribs and belly. When she tried to emerge, her head was slammed back down onto the concrete with a solid thump, which left her dazed and finally unable to resist. Kevin now yelled her name as he saw her naked body sliding across the floor from the circle of candles and into the darkness in the corners of the room. He saw her white shape pulled up the wall to the ceiling as her screams became muffled and a brief warm rain of blood fell upon him from above. Now he ran. At first the door seemed locked, but soon he realized that it was held from within by the same force which was now tearing at his clothing and hair. He slammed himself against it with all his might, and choking his way through the small crack he had opened, he squeezed into the night and fled. As he ran past the main building, he was beset by the horrifying sound of screams from behind the walls, and he watched as splatters of blood were flung against the windows in Pollock-like patterns of red. There were crashing thumps as warm bodies were slammed against the tin walls with incredible force, as people were ripped to pieces in midair by whirling, unseen assailants. He found his way across the parking lot into the path where he ran screaming and weeping into the night. They should have known, he thought frantically as he laughed in insane despair. They should have known that word would get out, and the really evil spirits would come. The rapists, the serial killers, those who had been murdered, abused, and driven insane themselves. They should have known that they would find out and come for a chance to play with willing, living flesh.